Isolation breeds creativity. In the East, law was all but lost. Without a government capable of protecting its citizens, the mantle of power had to be handed down to someone, or in this case, many someones. But that wouldn't be for long. The drive for power was a thing inherent in the human race. It motivates, saws from left to right, up and down, like a river through a canyon of gold. Power for power's sake was evil, but so were the people in anarchy, and so was Scientist E. Evil, the definition given to something against the normal moral code. There were so many greater things than the concept of good. Look to the galaxy, and the night sky lit ablaze by anarchy's torches. Even the naked eye would see something magnificent, if only they weren't blinded by the light of humanity. What is blood to a galaxy, a cosmos that never dies? No one could imagine what Scientist E could visualize. The thousands of stars working for a bigger picture, spiraling into nothingness for nothingness' sake. No one was as smart as Scientist E. They did not see the blue of the young cosmos. They did not realize how immortal it really was. Downtrodden, forgotten, never taken seriously, Scientist E was finished being the only person who really knew how much more capable she was. She was meant for greatness. It was written in the stars, and she would make it a reality. No longer she herself the only person who realized who she really was, but still, she was painfully aware of every one of her wrongdoings. That would soon be changed. The room had a monochrome and dreary atmosphere. It looked empty and unloved, the only thing of interest being a desk and a chair. The woman sitting at the desk looked like she hadn't slept in some time. What betrayed her insomnia were her eyes. They were flickering over every rivet of the metal floor, as if she were missing something in the faint shadows cast by the protruding metal. For a laboratory, the room was uncomfortably bare, far too big for the table and chair that it held. The ceiling was acceptable at least. It was made of dark metal that was smoother than the floor. The room itself was circular, not fitting for the square table forced into the corner. The table itself functioned as the main laboratory. On it were several books with several strange titles. Even stranger than the title No Honor in Ordinance was the item, if it could be called an item, that lay near it. It was colorless, but that didn't mean it was black. It oozed as if it were to fall off the desk, but it seemed more egophilic than water. It stuck to itself like honey. When Scientist E stared at the ooze that looked black, but wasn't, she could almost convince herself that it was already spilling onto the floor. She was sure that a lesser person would think that the ooze was moving, maybe even breathing, but she knew better. A lesser person would also think the ooze was black. It wasn't black. Scientist E wore a lab coat as white as any other, but unlike most lab coats, which were cheap and easily cleaned, her lab coat was made out of spun wool. It draped all the way to her calf, where it met the brims of her leather boots. But most expensive of all was the suit that she wore underneath the lab coat. It was black, as any good suit is, and Scientist E wasn't about to cover it up, so she wore her outer coat open to reveal the bow tie proudly pronounced around her neck. At her belt, she had an assortment of equipment, a blowtorch, a toothed saw, and an overgrown pair of pliers. Scientist E busied herself by poking and prodding the ooze that wasn't black. So far she hadn't had any time for anything but the most important of tasks, like making sure that the ooze didn't fall on the floor, and making sure the ooze wasn't black, which it wasn't. It was only recently that she had gathered enough leeway for the most scientific experiment, touching the ooze. That's what the scientists in the novel Faith of the Faithless did. They touched things and poured water on things and burned things. Scientist E made certain that her things, being those of the not black variety, were all in place before starting her procedure. She wanted to see how the blackless ooze reacted to extreme heat, if at all. Then she would see how the unblack ooze reacted to lack of heat. Perhaps it would change color. She had thought briefly about cutting out the eye of a bird and using it to look at the ooze. She discarded the thought when she remembered that the dismembered eye of a bird was terribly unscientific. Then she touched it. She didn't mean to touch it. Without thinking, without moving, she had taken off her glove and touched the black ooze on her desk. She really didn't mean to touch it, but her intention was irrelevant, therefore false, and therefore stupid. She had touched the ooze, whether she wanted to or not. It was cold, very cold. Had Scientist E been any less disciplined, she would have shot her hand back in surprise. It was possibly too cold. Yes, much too cold. As if there was no heat in the ooze at all. It took a while for Scientist E to notice that, despite the literal cold, her hand was metaphorically on fire. She decided that the most logical thing to do would be to halt the torture that was shooting its way up her veins. She attempted to retreat, but found her hand quite disagreed. Scientist E was offended that a part of her body would dare disobey her in such a way. She expected insubordination from the kingless serfs that she employed to gather her resources, but of her own self. She would not let this stand. Her own right hand. From her belt hung a saw, each tooth the canine of a wolf, each wolf of a pack, and each pack ravenously hungry. Scientist E was ambidextrous, so it was no effort for her to bring out the saw from her belt with her left hand. Saw grasped firmly, she placed the blade on her right bicep. The scientist couldn't help but marvel at how effective only one pull of the saw was in cutting her own flesh. A good inch with only one stroke, not even including the wool that the metal had to go through before severing skin. She pushed the saw back again, but this time was disappointed with the result. The second usage of the saw only merited a few millimeters of damage at most. But of course, how silly of her. The saw only worked one way. She must have met the bone by now. Her arm wasn't all that thick. She pulled her saw toward herself, and yet again it cut an inch deep, splintering the bone like a branch. Something in the back of Scientist E's mind was yelling, no, screaming, but she couldn't understand what it was screaming about. She'd forgotten enough things, lost enough thoughts. She wasn't about to allow herself to lose another thought without at least a little conquest in the badlands of her own mind. She stopped sawing so she could chase after the voice in her head, but when she tried, the voice stopped screaming. She frowned strongly and grunted to herself. Then Scientist E sawed again. And there it was again, a whimpering cry, yelling across the expanse of her amygdala, carried like a howl of wind over the eastern sea. Scientist E was done waiting on the annoying voice. She continued her work, sawing one last time, finally severing her inflamed arm from her body. She pulled her shoulder free from the mess that had become her arm. It was no longer a part of her now, so it no longer mattered, or so she thought. It was soon after that her haste proved to be a misstep. The life that was once her arm gave sustenance to the anti-life that it became. The child of the arm now looked to Scientist E. The child did not take on the aspect of the arm. It looked like a great worm, its lips peeled back in a snarl too transcendental to be perceived as either friendly or malignant. Its teeth were like those of a whale's, giant brushes that could not paint, and like a whale, the mouth grasped at the air in front of it, taking heaps of matter into the vortex leading into the cosmos of the child. The teeth smeared the light, blurring Scientist E's vision as she tried to look deeper into its maw. Could her first impression be a deception? Perhaps the teeth were not teeth, but the lashes of an eye. The fraudulent scientist looked deeper into the wealth that was not hers, and saw the eye of her partial scion. Its eye was blue, but not in the way a human's would be. The eye was like a window into a star. One large blue central star with other smaller stars swirling around it. The orbiting stars were weaker, red and cold. Though usually a red star would be larger than a blue star, these stars were small and meager in comparison to the predominant eye. Scientist E looked past the eye and saw the body of the worm. It was as dark as the ooze that was not black. The body was long, and though up close it looked shapeless, further down the line of the body, it started to appear serpentine. The room that they had once been in was now broken. letting the body of the child elongate infinitely into the vastness of an unfamiliar starry sky.
They move and shift. All energy, never ending,
the eye said to her. Perhaps this eye was a mouth, and perhaps it did eat. Whether the star saw or whether it consumed was of no interest to the forces of life. And Scientist E was the holiness of those forces, a messiah come to Malu. So if the eternal truth did not care about this creature before her, neither did she. If she could not comprehend it, it was not worth comprehending. The teeth of the maw brushed away the blur of light and spoke once more.
And now we are stuck in a loop. The gravity of two stars caught in perfect balance. No other force, no matter how strong, is able to pull the two away from each other, while they too never allow themselves to touch. They lunge forward with every passing moment, but by the wave of a hand, they miss each other's entrancing gravity. They pass by each other and still trade equilibrium. A flare of vitality goes from one to the other, and the same is given back. So the question stands, are they two or are they one?
Scientist E moved to educate the Eldritch creature. Two, what they share does not make them the same. They aren't even alive, they behave that way because of the laws of physics. The child blinked again, and with its blink, its mouth moved again.
Are they not alive? You act as if they do not play a cosmic game. You deny the reality that is right in front of you. With each turn of the axle, another shift becomes true, and the last false. But if you are so keen on physics, then how have you not caught my flaw?
The entire line of thinking is theoretical, therefore the entire design of it is flawed, Scientist E protested. If the design is flawed, I am not responsible for catching it. The child oozed forward, much like the ooze that was not black. Its grotesque form still harkened back to that semi-liquid state, sloshing weakly. Scientist E did not react. She stood there while the creature absorbed her, its great eye seeing more than a simple scientist.
You,
the creature said, and its lashes moved, and its eye blinked, and its voice became all-engulfing.
are.
The child boomed in her ear as if it trapped sound itself, bending the noise like it bent light. Still, Scientist E could not know what was happening. It wasn't important. It wasn't important.
A fraud.
What was this voice? It was not human, so it only followed suit that it wouldn't speak like a human. It eclipsed everything. Like an ocean over sharp rocks at the shoreline, it filled every particle in the air with something that was not sound, something that could not be sound. What was it? Scientist E had to know. The child let out a great noise, a bellow from DC's itself. Had it been sound, the area would have vibrated, but the noise being outside of such limitations was not contained by the material surrounding. Again, she understood the noise, but this time she knew that it was not speaking any language other than that of pure thought and mind, conveyed without pictures or words.
Finally, you've asked a question. What was this voice? Questions are the calling of a true scientist.
And the true scientist was filled with doubt. Everything she knew was consumed forever in what was not black. And that noise, it was there again. Just like the bellow, but not the same. That noise of the screaming in Scientist E's mind returned again to meet fate. Scientist E finally allowed herself to be consumed by doubt and asked the question, "What are you?"
Naga.
The child said back. Glorious, 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 glorious. Finally, Scientist E had an answer to a question. Her heart fluttered to the sky. She let out a high-pitched laugh that floated down through the chasm that was not black. The screaming in her head still persisted even in her jubilation. She wanted to ask more questions. She knew where to start. The voice inside her head.
There is a war in your mind,
Naga said.
Two halves of your soul, the subconscious and the conscious.
Scientist E listened intently to every word that Naga said. She was infatuated with the blink that spoke and the word that did not make sound, and the being most of all, the being that was not black. Glorious, infallible, glorious. Naga finished her thought.
They want to kill each other.
That couldn't be good. The creature arrives here and insinuates some sort of mental illness? Ridiculous, marvelous, glorious, extravagant in every detail. What else could this monster, this child, this carnage do?
Would you like to find out?
Scientist D had thought long enough. She did not have to think any longer. Every moment of her waking life was spent on this goal. It was time that she ascended, that she was revered, that she was taken seriously. Anarchy, with all its gangs, all its injustice, would finally unite for its greater purpose. All because of the ooze that wasn't black. I would, she said. The words caught in her throat, but she said them all the same. And was that rumble a joy? Was the child purring in anticipation? Would Naga soon quake the mountaintops with its thunderous, rousing thought? The earth itself could not feel the grand cataclysm caused by the voice of Naga, but would the sun? Would gravity bow to this most hallow of creatures? Naga's holy light shone upon Scientist E.
You are a scientist who does not know the world. You do not know heaven and hell, the seraphars and their automatons. You were meant to reach the clouds, but the world is so stubborn in that way.
Scientist E was alone, not inside or out of Naga. The floor was the same as in her study, but the walls were missing. A fog of darkness loomed over the edges of her vision, so that she could not see more than a meter or two in front of her face. It was as if she were a finite light source in a world of infinite darkness. Her desk was gone. She looked for it in the shadows, peering deeper and deeper. What she saw instead was something in the fog, and of course, the fog itself. The shadow was not black. But she could not dwell on the not black. She now saw a more enlightened view of the not color. She did not know what it was, but she knew its name without having to think about it at all. A zeppelin sailed in the shadow sea, revealing the secrets of flight to the dumbfounded scientist.
Know now the ins and outs, the zeppelin said. You will know the truth, and the truth will know you back. This zeppelin is my gift to you. It is a weapon of war, used in a time that was not your own.
Scientist D looked closer at the zeppelin. Its shape was boring, just a missile in the sky. Its color was bland, but it flew, and that was possibly the most incredible thing Scientist E had ever imagined. A city's worth of people, all flying on a giant, what was the word? Balloon. Scientist E hadn't seen a balloon either, but she knew the word. Perhaps she was the only one who did.
Learn to build this and many more machinations, Naga said. You may have the knowledge, but not the skill. You need an army, you need contact, and to manipulate another, you need clarity. Look into the fog, look deep, until you find the arm that I took from you.
Scientist E looked down to the right. Her arm was still missing. She had completely forgotten it wasn't there. The stump was bleeding badly. The cold had slowed down the blood flow, but she would die if she did not correct the grievous mistake. She took a step forward into the fog and found that her view moved with her, just as she suspected it would. She stumbled forward, letting her bloodied shoulder hang loosely. As she moved, the zeppelin in front of her dissipated. She would have been concerned had the image not been burned into her mind. She walked, dragging her feet over the metal rivets on the floor, almost tripping twice, but she was far too dignified to trip on the floor, even if the blood of her own self-inflicted wound lubricated it. Another one of her theories was proven correct, after she had walked for some time. She had not yet met a wall, so despite the floor being unchanged, she was not in the same room she had been in before. As if to illustrate the point, the ground in front of her started to become more and more overgrown. It was too dark for plant life to look anything other than monochrome, but it was evident that they would have been green had there been a sun. She stopped moving to digest that thought. She had no way of knowing that the plant life was green. She had just assumed. She had to know for certain. She ignored the blood freely falling from her arm and instead knelt down to the grass on the floor. Too much metal and blood was in the way. She scurried forward on all three limbs until the metal floor was no longer visible underneath the overgrowth. A little light of pink, so vibrant even the darkness couldn't cloud it completely. She pressed her face up against the color, and sure enough, it was there. A flower, vibrant and pink, placed right in front of her as she crouched down next to it. She knew its name, just as she had known the balloon. She almost laughed at how fitting it was. A cosmos. It was a cosmos flower. She rose to her feet and looked forward again. The black and white color of the grass in her vicinity looked ever so slightly tinted green now that she knew the truth. That would imply that each living plant conducted photosynthesis, a process Scientist E had just had the pleasure of learning about. But how did they photosynthesize without any sun? Where was she? A whimper in the distance, like the cry she had heard in her mind, but this time it wasn't in her mind. It was real and in the flesh. A female voice, very close by. It was a dozen meters out of sight. She could throw a stone and hit it. Scientist E resisted the temptation to start digging in the grass for a rock to throw in that direction. Instead, she started jogging towards the sound. As she got closer, the voice became more robotic. Another word she knew from the well of knowledge she now had. It felt shattered, like several voice recordings mixed together. Oftentimes, the sobbing would get stuck on loop, repeating the same noise over and over again, until the creature had forgotten the next verse to her cry. Scientist E slowed down as she got closer, letting the bizarre noise overtake her. It spoke not with sound but like Naga. She could have shuddered, if she wanted to. Finally, Scientist E was crouched down next to the thing. She was unsurprised to see the back of her own white coat draped over the huddled creature. Her blonde hair was sprawled on the ground all around it, caught in the grass like it had been lying there for some time. It shook with every heave of breath.
What you would have been without the biding echo left behind by the ancestors of your human race, Naga told her. The denial of the bountiful gift of intelligence lies in front of you, rotting in filth, like the pig who would deny such thought. Her own existence a paradox, as she speaks with thoughts she cannot hear. The similarities between her and a swine are sickening. Kill it, like what it pretends to be. Stock.
Scientist E scowled at both the pig and Naga. Naga was not one to give orders to her. It was Naga that she used for her sake, not the other way around. It was Naga, the gift bringer, that came to endow gifts upon her. Nonetheless, she could not change the fact that what Naga said was true. Scientist E moved to take out her saw. It had proven an effective tool once before. Its loyalty would be rewarded.
Take the arm from the swine and attach it to your own, so that the two can become one,
Naga told her. Scientist E did it because she wanted to, not because Naga told her to. So, with that mutual understanding properly put into conscious thought, she moved towards the heap on the floor.
No. Don't do it! Why are you hurting me?
The pig said. Scientist E did not say a word. The pig was lying with her back facing the scientist, her right arm unprotected from the ravenous teeth of her saw.
Scientist E knelt down next to the pig and placed the saw on her arm. I just want what's best, the pig continued to plead. You are lazy, Scientist E spat back. I'm doing us both a favor by sundering our bond. But I can't live without you, the pig protested. Scientist E scowled at the disgusting creature on the floor. Her saw was ready to cut. She viciously tensed her muscles and pulled it back. The pig squealed, a pleading, desperate sound. The scientist spoke again. Not my problem, she said without sound. If you cannot live without me, you are a weak parasite. You have been a thorn in my side, never ebbing. I have worked hard to suppress you and lock you up, but you just won't stay still. You are the nagging in the back of my mind, the rot to all my flaws. You are the disease that inflicts every other person. They, unlike myself, are just not smart enough to see it. I will be free of you. Finally, and Naga will help me. Naga did not think a word. Naga did not speak a thought. Perhaps Naga wasn't even watching, but Scientist E did not care. With one savage pull, the rest of the arm was cut clean off. The pig screamed in pain and lurched forward, but she was far too lazy to move or run away. Scientist E clasped her hand around the freed arm before it could roll off of the pig's rapidly dying body. She got to her feet and shoved the arm into her socket like she was a doll that could be taken apart and put back together on a whim. Soundlessly, Scientist E looked down to her unfeeling right hand. It was tightly clutched around something. For the moment, she didn't have control over her appendage. She was attempting to pull her right hand open with the other when a thought struck her.
The E in your name, Naga cooed. It has always had a meaning. It is not a new word, nor an old one. I have told you my name, but the question you should have asked is, what am I? The universe is a beautiful thing, Dr. E. Watch it unfold before you.
And she did. She did watch it. It was magnificent. No. Without words. It sprawled, massive yet tiny all at the same time. Could it fit in the palm of her hand? Would she be able to see it if it could? Was it to scale? No, it couldn't be. It was far too bright. She stared at it for a long time, entranced. Was this what it was like to be Naga? Time slows while your mind races? She doubted she could have had this many individual thoughts in years of existence. But now it was before her, the history not just of man, but of every star with every name. She couldn't even vocalize most of them.
Do you see? It's stretching,
Naga said.
All energy, never ending. Until.
She was the Messiah, the one who came to complete the grand task. She saw it. Yes, she saw it. The universe expanding. But expanding wasn't the right word. It stretched. It stretched like a fog over a crevice. It stretched and stretched, filling every corridor. But something inside her was still frustrated. Inexplicably, ununderstandably, she was frustrated. Like there was a puzzle she could not solve. But there it was, to put her at rest. Naga.
Until it does,
Naga said.
My original query was flawed, but here is a tidy solution. The universe stretches infinitely, but can infinity become its own end? Can infinity be the grand purpose?
Yes, there it was, her grand purpose.
Your grand purpose.
She was the ender, your entropy, the final piece in the game.
You were named after the concept. A death to a thing that is not alive, Naga told her. But that was the last lie. A different lie in a different axle. Now the concept is named after you. Your philosophers created paradoxes, but they are only a mimic of the true paradox. Humanity. You, Dr. Entropy.
Entropy never liked her name. It had an edge to it that never made sense. She had always questioned why her foolish parents had named her such a thing. Her parents must have been on a bad naming streak. Her brother's name was terrible too. He didn't even allude to it when introducing himself. But now she would turn her name into something fantastic. Fantastic just like her. She clenched her recently won right fist hard against itself and found that her novel ambition had allowed her to control the defiant limb. The blood in her veins danced with a new light in her dark, dark heart. But it was not black. No, it was never black. Entropy felt a weak crunch coming from the strength of her fist. She let up on her palm and gave her white-knuckled fingers a deserved but unrequested rest. In her newborn hand, there was something she had seen a moment before, but now it had a righteous meaning to it. Entropy looked down at the cosmos flower. The vibrant petals had started to turn gray. The supple flower would never have made a crunch before, but in the palm of her hand, it was shriveled and dying, and like an autumn leaf before a cold winter, it was dry. Entropy frowned and turned her hand to the side to let the maimed flower float to the floor. When the dried petals hit the grass gave way to dirt. Entropy observed the petals sinking to the bottom of the thick canopy of grass and wondered why the strong vegetation had suddenly decided to be so gentle to the dead flower. It was only after a few seconds had passed that she realized that what was happening was anything but gentle. As the petals touched the grass wilted and died, retreating as if to some horror. The disease spread across the expanse of the grassland. The area within Entropy's cone of vision was dead within a minute. Entropy walked forward through her own dreamland and watched the grass crumble and die. She knew at that moment that she was the end of all things, whether it was in this life or the next, this world or the next. Entropy would be the final death of that which was not alive. An ecosystem comprised of the many termites who crawled on the tree of life would bend and quake to her. She was entropy. Her blood was not black, but to the fools who looked upon it, to those clinging to the lamps that light the street, to those that would believe that they could live safely off of the backs of the competent while they themselves wasted their lives, to those not smart enough to see the truth, to those, the entropic ooze was black.
Its lips peeled back in a snarl, too transcendental. How do I not know how to pronounce the word that I wrote? I literally wrote this down. Are you kidding me? Is there no, how to pronounce transcendental? Transcendential? I want to say transcendential. Transcendental. Okay, transcendental. Thank you.